Historically speaking, the Divine List has always kind of been seen as getting the short end of the stick, and there are good reasons for that if you look at previous versions of the game, but if you look at current versions of Pathfinder 2e, I think Divine is maybe the strongest spell list. So, how did we get here? What exactly changed in order to turn a list from pretty definitively the worst to, in my opinion, one of the best lists? And for that, we're going to need to start from the very beginning and go over the history of the Divine spell list. And in order to explore this, we are going to be using Archives of Nethys. And I just want to quickly go over how you can also filter for the same things I am. In the top right corner, you'll see, not on my recording, but in the top right corner, there is just like Shaylin's corner. It looks like a little painter's tool and lets you change a bunch of things about the site, such as colors, fonts, etc. And I am checking it to not use Pathfinder Remastered Core because, well, we're going to be looking at legacy options for the beginning of this video. And then in search queries for the Divine spell list, I go in sources and spoilers, and I am setting release dates so I can talk about different eras of the game. So for this release, we're only looking at what was printed in the original core rulebook. So we are looking at just the 151 spells the Divine list was printed with. And I should start by saying, this 151 is the shortest spell list of all the ones in the original game, but as we all know, it is not the size of the spell list that matters, it is what you are able to do with it. So with that, let's go ahead and talk about what they were doing with the spell list. Because they still have some of their real big name spells that keep the Divine list on the map. Because they have stuff like Heal. And Heal is, of course, the big generic healing spell in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. It does exactly what you want it to do. It heals. And other things that they have that other spells may not. They had Bless, but this is old Bless. Only a 5-foot emanation. A lot of the +1 buff spells had shorter range back then and came at a higher premium, which is why all the memes have Bard and 3 fighters, and that meme was much more prevalent back in this era of the game when it was very few source books. Because there really weren't that great of area buff spells at that point, so Bard's niche, it was the only thing that could fill it. And then you'd go through and you go look at the second rank spells and you got Sound Burst for like area damage, but 10-foot burst and 30 feet, very kind of weak. Spiritual Weapon, it's a sustained damage option, but can be a little finicky if people are moving quickly. And this theme kind of goes on and on and on. But I think that I can further exemplify some of the Divine List problems by just zooming in on these cantrips for a little bit. Because I'm just going to zoom in into its damage dealing cantrips. Because we had stuff like Chill Touch, which only does damage to living creatures, Daze, which only does damage to creatures with a mind, Disrupt Undead, which only damages undead, and Divine Lance, which does alignment damage, which this is a page that you can only see if you have Archives of Nethys in this legacy toggle. In the remaster, this blurb about alignment damage is replaced by a blurb about spirit damage. So, let's talk about how alignment damage worked, because it is a little funny. Weapons and effects keyed to a particular alignment can deal chaotic, evil, good, or lawful damage. These damage types apply only to creatures that have the opposing alignment trait. Chaotic damage only harms lawful creatures. Evil damage harms only good creatures. Good damage harms only evil creatures. And lawful damage harms only chaotic creatures. So now, with those being the 4 damage cantrips that the Divine List had at that time, how do they deal with a mindless construct that is aligned to neutral? The answer, they can't. Period. They just can't do it. And they don't have any of the standout spells like Slow or Haste for that kind of fight. So what they do is they set up a heroism and then be a healer. And they can't do anything else because their cantrips are all negated. So if you wanted to play a Divine Caster, you needed to somehow gish it up so that you could have a repeatable attack. If you have a longer adventuring day. So there's a necessity for the Divine List to make you a gish. Because the Divine List attacking options were that poor. you didn't have a way to just like prep 1 to 2 cantrips to deal with everything. No. You didn't have it that good. And a lot of their big damage spells were also alignment damage. And the funny part about alignment damage is you can only pick alignments that match your deity's alignments for your alignment damage. So if you are trying to fight a demon, but you are a cleric of Nethys, sorry, all your alignment spells do not function because Nethys is true neutral. And true neutral damage does nothing because no alignment opposes neutral. There were a bunch of discussion at that time about, hey, should we maybe have alignment damage do some damage to creatures that are just one alignment step away and things of that nature? Have the immunity only be to creatures that share that trait? Because it was rough to be a divine caster back then. Because you'd have stuff like Divine Wrath, which does a large amount of damage, and in theory, your allies could be immune to it. And you deal 4 damage to 40 tens of damage to all the creatures with the opposing alignment. You, as an adventuring party, you likely all have a similar alignment. For example, in Pathfinder Society, they have all evil characters banned, or they had all evil characters banned. Now they have all unholy characters banned. But you could then Divine Wrath, do good damage, and be sure that you aren't hitting any of your own team, but that is not consistent. So this had no effect on animals, no effect on neutral soldiers. It required you to have a specific deity in order to even use it, and that kind of issue is echoed throughout the Divine list. I believe that Divine was intended to have some area damage, because otherwise it wouldn't make sense for them to get stuff like Sunburst at the higher ranks, and Eclipse Burst, which are just these really, really big area damage spells with a reflex save. So I think that the Divine list was intended to have decent damage, just not early, and a lot of the game is played in early game. So the Divine list, very weak when it first came out. Where you look at the other lists, like the Occult list, you had Telekinetic Projectile as like your damage cantrip. You still had healing in the form of Soothe. You had Axe to Haste, Slow, Synthostasia, all from the core book. That's a kit right there. And you still have Axe to like Bless, Fear, etc. This was also Bless, Fear, but you know. The Arcane Primal list, they had Electric Arc, so they were happy. And of course, the Primal list had Heal, Slow, Haste. Arcane list had Slow, Haste. Everybody was kind of had core things they could fall on, but not the Divine list. The Divine list had alignment damage as its gimmick that only it had access to with any regularity, and it was not great. So, what did they get as the game aged? The next couple years pass, Secrets of Magic comes out, Advanced Player's Guide comes out. What kinds of stuff do they get? Well, they get Haunting Hymn. This is a sonic damage cantrip. It finally damages constructs. They have a cantrip that can damage mindless constructs. This is not great damage, but it is still one of the first, if not the first. I need to double check. I think Acidic Burst might be the true first, but one of the very early on cantrips with a true area of effect. This was a rare thing to see back in the day. So, Haunting Hymn is notable for that reason. It's also saving throw, so blah 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 blah. And then in terms of spells, the one that I want to focus in on is, now they have something called Sudden Blight. This is, I think, their biggest new spell from like this era of the game. And it is a second rank spell that in 120 foot range, you can place a 20-foot burst down and have it blow up for a d10 per spell rank. It's a pretty good spell. It is a satisfactory area damage spell that can hit a lot of different creatures. And if you're dealing with a swarm of undead that are around you, you just 3-action heal them, so this hits the rest. But you're still struggling to those constructs, and that is still going to be an issue that echoes throughout all of our discussion about the Divine list. But, you know, they're starting to get a little bit more in terms of their ability to play the game. They have Magic Mailbox, where if you saw my previous video, you'll know that I think this spell is very good in terms of the types of shenanigans you can pull with it out of combat. And so, the Divine List is starting to get some stuff going on, but it's still not enough to be, like, notable above the other lists, and especially not notable compared to Primal, because Primal is still coasting off of Electric Arc, Electric Arc, Heal, Slow, Haste. That's enough. So, yeah, the Divine List is still not great yet. So now, let's talk about right before the remaster. We just got Rage of Elements at this time period. We are now looking at late 2023. This is when we just got the Orc license, when Player Core is on the horizon of a thing that will happen. The Divine List finally got its physical damage cantrip that can hit things from range and will always work. And that spell is called Needle Darts. This is probably the single biggest buff the Divine List has gotten, and it makes it so that the Divine List has a playable early game attack cantrip that hits everything. That is massive. Being able to make sure you hit every single creature in the game for something is very, very relevant. And so this lets you just shoot out a bunch of needles and do some damage with an attack roll. If you crit, you also make them bleed. Perfectly fine. And, you know, they didn't really get that much extra. I mean, you can talk about Bone Shaker from Quest of the Frozen Flame, and how this is a very strong single target damage spell against creatures with a skeleton. You can also talk about Torturous Trauma, and how this is a very, very good damage spell to creatures with organs. Again, both don't do anything to constructs, but, you know, I said that'd be a theme. And also, a note with Torturous Trauma, if you just erase its flavor text, having a non-lethal damage cantrip makes sense for a good aligned cleric. So if you just scrape off the loving to sadistically torture your foes, you know, it's a pretty good aligned spell. Anyway. There really isn't that much more they got from this era in particular, but you're seeing stuff like, ooh, Radiant Beam. Again, it's alignment damage, but it's still like a good attack spell. And really, what made Divine a list that is like worth picking above others instead of, it's fine now, because at this point, it has a damage cantrip, it has area damage, it has healing, it has some amount of buffing and debuffing, so it's kind of a generalist list at this point, doesn't really do anything great other than healing, but it's pretty good in a lot of respects. Then, the remaster came. And for this, I'm going to change my mode to... And then I'm going to change my release date. Because this is what the Divine List looks like now. And I'm going to just click Load Arraigning. And so we have the big damage cantrip Needle Darts, and now we have spirit damage. So any creature that isn't a construct, of course, has spirit, and you can deal spirit damage to it. So now we look at the spell that would do nothing before, Divine Lance, because, you know, it had alignment damage and had all that weirdness. And now it deals spirit damage. So if a creature is alive, is undead, even if they are inside of somebody that is possessed, you can zap them with a Divine Lance. And it is sanctified, so it still triggers the weaknesses that they'd have. So like if you're fighting demons, you could still do good aligned, or rather, holy Divine Lance, zap into them and get that extra damage. And they also made all the alignment damage spells easier to use. If I scroll down to 4th rank, you remember back at the start of the video, I actually talked about how Divine Wrath was very hard to utilize. But you can make all your allies immune to it by having people pick their alignments properly. They kept that your allies are immune by saying you deal 4d10 spirit damage to enemies in the area, not all creatures in the area, just enemies. This means your allies are immune to it. So now Divine has blasting that they can use in tight rooms. At the start of a fight, you set up a buff. In the middle of a fight, you launch on Divine Wrath and other area damage spells that don't friendly fire, because all the spells that were alignment damage are now a consistent damage type and don't friendly fire, giving them a serious niche in the blasting game. So Divine is now a good blasting list in that circumstance where you are melee characters going into a dungeon and you don't want to friendly fire a fireball. This is a real niche, and this is something that only the Divine list is able to do. And you get access to these burst damage area spells at 2nd rank before Fireball comes online at 3rd for the Primal and Arcanes. Divine has damage now, and it still has heal. It has the most amount of healing spells out of any spell list, and in addition to all of that, they buffed Bless to be a 15-foot emanation to start and get plus 10 feet when you sustain it. So, Bless is also stronger now. And it's to the point where I think that Bless has kind of removed a lot of Bard's niche, because, well, unless you are getting the extra things on Bard that say your Dirge of Dooming or giving everybody bonus to AC, your normal Courageous Anthem is just kind of Bless but not, and other classes can get Bless while having class features devoted to doing other stuff. So, I really think that the Divine list, as it stands now, is very strong because of its blasting, because its buff spells got buffed, and because of its quantity of healing. And before somebody mentions, oh, but like, this requires a bunch of source books from throughout the years. Not really, because all this is now, I mentioned, is now in Player Core 1 or Player Core 2. So, the Divine list is very strong now. And I think this is also what is making Oracle and Cleric such strong classes, because I think people felt that they were very weak because the Divine list felt very weak. Well, Oracle had other issues with it, but being stuck with the Divine list was considered a downside back in that day. But I think Paizo wanted to make sure all of the lists are balanced roughly equivalently, because of classes like Sorcerer that pick between any of the lists. So as such, I think that they really hit it. I think that Divine is now a really unique list that has area damage that doesn't friendly fire, healing, and buffs. So, that's the end of my short walkthrough in the history of the Divine spell list. If you enjoyed, feel free to subscribe, and have a good one. Peace.